Okay, folks, I am back, and yes, we're still talking NFL. I think this channel will probably be used for a number of topics that are a little less political and more, things that are general interest, maybe even some movie reviews, maybe some of the theology and, society and theology stuff will move over here. So you're going to see a lot of stuff here that might not even be related to anything, except here we already have 3 videos that are NFL based. But in any case, I want you guys to subscribe to me on Gab. You can find me at Starscream85 over here. So my idea right now is that the best way to grow the channel, create a little more conversation among the people who follow the channel, is right now I think on Gab, although if you guys have a preference for another platform, mine's I think is good. That would also be fine. I also have a Discord, by the way. I can probably drop that. I think it is in the description anyway. But I will drop it in the chat. So, I'll do that right now. Now, we're going to talk a little about the NFL playoffs. And as you know, I picked the winners last week, and so far I'm 2-0. But, today I think the real hard pick is going to come up, and that is the hardest pick of the weekend, okay, would be, in my opinion, Baltimore versus the Chargers. So if you're somebody who is really looking for a clear pick on this one, I think the hardest part is that at the time when they played, I think it was 2 weeks ago, it was week 16, the Chargers had a couple of their starters out. They had Melvin Gordon, who's their best starting running back, and I think that they also had Keenan Allen, who for a long time has been their best receiver. Now, at the same time, if you know anything about Philip Rivers' career, you can see that, there's here we go. Antonio Gates. So his top weapon is still on the team, and you can see that this is basically their career.
Over time, repetition.
And I think that Philip Rivers is one of the most underrated quarterbacks, possibly because people don't pay attention to when he was in San Diego, they didn't pay attention to him. Now that he's in LA, they're still not giving him as much attention as other quarterbacks and other teams.
Time again and again, you just learn to have a feel for one another.
The connection with Antonio and Philip is, one of the most, if not the most prolific tandem in football in the history of the game.
It's just 2 guys that have been together a long time.
From the 44, Rivers steps up and throws to Antonio Gates. Touchdown Chargers. 50.
So why is it so important to have a receiver like Antonio Gates for Phil Rivers? Well, the fact that Phil Rivers is a good quarterback, but he doesn't have from a game that I saw about 4 or 5 weeks ago between the Chargers and Kansas City, apparently it was explained that Philip Rivers doesn't have necessarily the most natural throwing motion. He throws a lot of back foot throws, so naturally a lot of his throws will go to the tight end. But when you have a tight end who's basically a wrecking ball like Antonio Gates, that makes a lot of difference.
6 yards from Rivers to Gates.
Rivers to Gates. This combination is one of the most lethal combinations in the NFL. They have a wonderful quarterback in Philip Rivers, and they have a future Hall of Famer in Antonio.
So did you see that throw? You have him basically.
They have a wonderful quarterback in Philip Rivers, and they have a.
You saw him basically having to turn his body as he threw.
Future Hall of Famer in Antonio Gates.
Anytime you talk about the Chargers offense, it starts with Antonio Gates and Philip Rivers.
73 times Gates and
pay dirt with Phillip Rivers. What a combination it's been.
15 seconds to play in an I formation. Gonna throw it up again for Gates. Can he catch a touchdown?
All right, so you guys get the point. In any case, I still think, despite that, I already picked Baltimore to win that game. I think I might come to regret that pick because honestly, I think with Melvin Gordon and with a stronger run game, that actually gives a lot of slack to Rivers and Gates, and they're going to be able to get a few more opportunities to score. So I guess I'm going to have to fall on my sword if I get that one wrong. That's the way you should live with picks. Now, let me see. The actual game is you have Baltimore favored by 2.5. So, I think it will be pretty close. So if you were a betting person, which, I don't really bet that often, I would pick Los Angeles. I'd pick San Diego, as most people still call them. I'd pick the Chargers. I think it's going to be a close game. I think that the Chargers could beat the spread. I don't know if Baltimore even covers it. It's a pretty small spread, but still. The other game, which is Philadelphia versus Chicago, I'm sticking with my pick of Chicago. Now you'll notice there's 4 games, and I've picked the favorite in all 4 games, mostly because now if you pick with the spread, I got the Dallas pick wrong because it was a 2-point victory and the line was 2.5. Thanks in part to the Dallas defense giving up a late touchdown. But for the most part, I've been somewhat consistent. In any case, yeah, I think with Philadelphia, let's compare, I guess, Nick Foles versus Carson Wentz. I know there's got to be a few videos here. Here's one.
One of the reasons the Eagles won the Super Bowl last year.
All right, this is a bullshit video.
Nick Foles does it again. Nick Foles,
I like this guy,
takes the Philadelphia Eagles onto a regular season Super Bowl favorite, Los Angeles Rams field, and leads them once again to an improbable victory. Nick Foles goes 24 of 31 for 270 yards, and outside of that Bills-Vikings game earlier this season, that Bills-Vikings game that no one could wrap their head around, the biggest underdog, the biggest line, the biggest deficit overcome, other than that crazy Bills-Vikes game, was last night on Sunday Night Football as the Eagles took down the Rams. Or better yet, Nick Foles took down the Rams. And if you don't think that's the beginning of a border war in Philadelphia, if you don't think there are denizens on both sides, those that live in Foles territory yelling at those that live in Wentz territory, you got your head in the sand. You're not an Eagles fan, you're a Philadelphia Ostrich fan. This is beginning. All it takes is a little 3-game run. All it takes is this 29% playoff odds. That's where the Eagles stand today. 29% chance to make the playoffs. All it takes is for that to become 100% fruition.
All right, so this doesn't really go through any highlights, but I'll say one of the reasons that I think Carson Wentz is simply not going to keep his job is because he gets injured. And Nick Foles, I think there was only 1 year that he really got injured. It might have been his last year in Philadelphia before being traded to St. Louis the previous time. No, I think that basically you're going to see a lot of people basically jump ship on Carson Wentz if he wins just this game. I guess I should say that if Nick Foles wins the game. So if Nick Foles defies the doubters and he gets Philadelphia to win a road game against the toughest I would say probably the toughest defense in the NFC, if not the entire NFL. Then 1 second, this was wrong link. So I would say, yeah, absolutely. I would go for I would go for Carson Wentz to be traded, and basically, I would say it's time to move back and say Nick Foles, even though he's a little older, he gets the payday. He becomes the starting quarterback. Maybe they draft somebody in a later round next year in order to be, I guess, the safety person, well, obviously the backup, but I don't see Carson Wentz, he hasn't, to my knowledge, played a full season in the NFL yet. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's even look at Carson Wentz's stats, because that's how you know. It'll say, so you have Philadelphia with Carson Wentz. So in 3 seasons, yeah, for his rookie season, he played all 16 games. He had a lower QB rating. Last year, he had a very high QB rating at 101.9. And this year, he was actually pretty good as well. But the Eagles lost, basically. I think you can actually look at their record, and they're not even, they're under Foles, they weren't even going to be in the playoffs. It was a pretty shitty season for them. Let me see here. Whoops. Here's their schedule. All right, so you had them. They started out with a win at Atlanta, and then they lost that game 2 at Tampa. But you see here in the middle of the season, it really started to get ugly when they lost at Tennessee and Minnesota. Those were close losses. Then they came back and beat the Giants, lost to Carolina, beat Jacksonville. So then they came into the bye week. They were, let's see here. That would be 1, 2, 3, 4. 4-4. So they were 4-4 going into the bye week. Come out, play at home at Dallas, lose the game, they got just destroyed the next week against the Saints, and then they pretty much salvaged the season with a few wins. They beat the Giants again. The Washington by this point was a shadow of itself. This was with Foles, basically. This was still Carson Wentz. So Carson Wentz gets injured after the Dallas game. So essentially, Wentz had led them to, you could say, a 6-7 record. That was their record under Carson Wentz. And then basically they needed Foles to guide them to the playoffs, and he has, and he's 3-0 now this season. The thing is, let's go through some of the teams that they beat. So the Rams, I think, are their most impressive victory. And after that would probably be the Houston game. That has to be, Houston, I believe they beat all the other NFC East teams besides Philly. Then you look at the other teams that they beat. They beat Washington and New York. They swept them. So that's I guess, those teams were not going to go anywhere. In the case of Washington, both of the wins came once their starter Alex Smith was injured. I think it was, in December. So Alex Smith had already been injured. I think that they were playing against Mark Sanchez that first time that they played them. So no, I don't think that those are impressive wins against Washington. And the Giants have been kind of a topsy-turvy, crappy team the whole year. They lose to Pittsburgh. They got, these are the preseason games. So sorry, they lose to Tampa. In retrospect, it wasn't that good of a Tampa team. They lose to Tennessee. That was a pretty good team. They lost to Minnesota, who seemed to, if you look at Minnesota's season, it's pretty understandable that that should be considered a disappointment. They lost to them at home, when I think last year they absolutely demolished them at home. So, I think that with Foles in the playoffs, they're going to be a more impressive team. I don't know if they'll be impressive enough to beat Chicago. Now let's talk a little about the games that happened yesterday. You had Indianapolis versus Houston, and then Seattle against Dallas. So, in my opinion, even though I'm a Cowboys fan, the more significant game for the postseason, looking forward and looking for at the NFL in general, looking forward would be the Indianapolis-Houston game. Because, as you know, I have J.J. Watt's face on the thumbnail. And the reason is that Indianapolis, this is finally the year that they've been waiting for. The Colts, I think it was 2012 when they drafted Andrew Luck. This is what they've been waiting for. This is the team that they wanted to build once they moved on from Peyton Manning. This is the future that they built on. You have to remember that year it was basically we can go back even to the Indianapolis Colts seasons, and then we'll compare that to Houston, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So you see, in the Wentz era, they've been to the playoffs basically it's not the Wentz era, it's the Andrew Luck era. When they drafted, have I been saying Carson Wentz the entire time? Because if I was, I'm an idiot. But since Andrew Luck was drafted before the 2012 season, they made the playoffs the first year, lost to the Ravens, who I think the Ravens eventually ended up winning the Super Bowl that year. Then they beat the Chiefs in a wild game, 45-44. And by the way, they're playing the Chiefs next week. Then they lost to the Patriots in the divisional playoffs, and that the Patriots went on to lose to the Broncos. The next year, they won 2 games. They beat the Bengals and the Broncos and ended up just getting destroyed by the Patriots in the conference championship. This year, they finally have. So they've gone through a 3-year playoff drought. That's over. Part of the reason that they had a drought was because Andrew Luck was injured last year. This time, unlike with Peyton Manning, the Colts decided to stick with Andrew Luck, which makes a little more sense because he's younger than Manning was at the time. This is going to be the year Andrew Luck will, if he can't go all the way to the Super Bowl this year, I think next year they will have the tool. Now, it sounds pretty stupid if I say, well, if it's not this year, then next year for sure. No, they have the tools now with Andrew Luck at quarterback, Marlon Mack at running back. They have a great defense that I was watching some of the game yesterday. Amazing pass rush, good corners. They have, I think Kenny Moore is one of the corners. They have basically the perfect defense. T.Y. Hilton at wide receiver, a lethal guy. You guys might not like that I'm talking so much. I'm blowing so much smoke up the ass of the Indianapolis Colts. I think that they finally have what they need to become a top-tier team in the NFL, not just a team that's tomorrow's champions. I think this year they could make it to the Super Bowl. I actually picked them to go to the Super Bowl over New England and over Kansas City. So you can take that for what it's worth. As for the other team that was in that game, I think that there's a lot of significance for the Texans because this is, so we can go to, I think you can just go to, here we go, Houston, and go look at their history, okay? They are a team that has traditionally won the wild card game and lost in the divisional playoffs. They lost in 2011 to the Ravens. They lost in 2012 to the Patriots. It wasn't even close. Throughout this entire time, they've had J.J. Watt. They lost in the wild card playoffs in 2015 to the Chiefs. Just got blown out of the building. I think that was during the Matt Schaub, the Matt Schaub experiment. We could even look at it. Let's see here. I believe it was Matt Schaub at quarterback at the time. Maybe it was Brian Hoyer. I don't remember. but it doesn't matter because they got just stomped by Alex Smith and the Chiefs. And then the next year they also beat the Raiders in the wild card round against a rookie Derek Carr. They beat them, and they got destroyed by the Patriots again. And then this year they've lost to the Colts. So I want to ask people, J.J. Watt, he is a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year. Okay, I don't know if he's going to win it this year. This last award is the Walter Payton Man of the Year award. That doesn't really matter for the football. So where is J.J. Watt going to end up one day? Is he going to play his entire career for Houston? I think it's a good question. There have been people who have played their entire career on teams that haven't won Super Bowls. You can talk about, for example, there aren't that many in recent memory if you think about it. But Dan Fouts, there was Jason Witten, never won a Super Bowl with Dallas. You have there was, a lot of people don't even play this for the same team their entire career. You have Phillip Rivers, who we were talking about earlier. Phillip Rivers has played his entire career with San Diego / LA, and hasn't even been to a Super Bowl. He's been a great quarterback, but what do you see out of him? He's basically gets to the AFC Championship and they melt like an ice cube, or should I say they freeze up because usually it happens in some place like New England. In many of these places that you get guys. Matt Stafford, for example. I don't think he will ever play in a Super Bowl, and I don't even know if he's ever going to make it to the playoffs. I think the Lions are a team that are basically cursed, and I think at this point you might even make the case that the Texans are cursed because they just can't seem to get any mojo working in the playoffs. Now, the last game of this wild card weekend that we're going to discuss was yesterday's Dallas-Seattle game. So going in, I think a lot of people were justifiably skeptical that the Cowboys could win that game. But the fact is that I think that the defense is vastly improved compared to the previous times that Dallas has been in the playoffs. Last time that they were in, they played Green Bay and I think they played Detroit the same year, and it was just not exactly. I think that the last time they just played Green Bay, and they got knocked out because they couldn't contain Aaron Rodgers' offense. Yesterday, I did see them containing Russell Wilson most of the game. He did have a few great plays to Tyler Lockett, but he couldn't make a lot of plays with his legs. You had their run game was very limited, and that's why I think the Cowboys won. Also, Dak Prescott did play a great game. He used his legs. He was able to use his legs to win. I think he got one first down during a drive when they needed a first down in midfield, and he also got that one first down at the end that basically plunged the dagger into the Seahawks because that was the first down at the goal line. That was the one that led to the touchdown that basically sealed the deal, put the game virtually out of reach. And, Dak Prescott, you can't say anymore that he is a Dallas, that he's not going to be basically the Dallas Cowboys starter going forward. I think he's earned the title of franchise quarterback at least for the next 2 years because he he has a playoff victory much earlier in his career than Tony Romo did. I think it took 5 or 6 seasons for Romo to actually win a single playoff game. That was the one game where they just demolished the Eagles, who had fallen apart that season. That was, I think, the 2010 season. So yeah, Dak Prescott is looking up. Jason Garrett, who I've wanted to be fired since long ago, I think he will earn an extension. It's possible he's already earned his extension based on the fact that they made the playoffs, based on the fact that they've won a playoff game. If they are able to win next week, and it's not yet secure what's going to happen next week, I think that he gets his extension for, if not next year, if not just next year, maybe even 2 more years. I think, like, in terms of contracts, he's already gotten his extension, but you know how Jerry Jones can suddenly flip on people. Although with Jason Garrett, I'm sure he's satisfied having a guy that he can basically use as a puppet. So you see that the bracket has been filled in only one of the games. That would be Indianapolis at Kansas City. The reason for that is that the lowest seed in the wild card round automatically plays the higher seed in the divisional round, or whatever round it would be. Obviously, in the AFC Championship, there's only 2 teams left. So, yeah, Kansas City is going to face Indianapolis, and I think that Indianapolis is going to go into Arrowhead and pull out a victory, maybe even a convincing victory. When I saw the Chargers go into Kansas City and pull out a victory, I was pretty convinced that the Chiefs are just not as strong as people think they are. You can't sleep on them. They still have an explosive offense, even without Kareem Hunt anymore. But they're gonna basically be up against a defense that I think Indianapolis's defense is perfectly capable of dealing with a lot of teams that one would think are offensive powerhouses. They did very well against a number of impressive offenses this season. They basically shut down. Let me see here. How come it's not pulling them up? Guess we have to go to the teams. So you can see their schedule here. Okay, so they had a rough start to the season. They were 1-5, and their only victory at the time was against the Redskins. And they actually had some pretty ugly losses against New York, against the Jets, against the Patriots, against Philly, although that one was pretty close. Then they finally got their legs and destroyed Buffalo. They won on the road at Oakland. And then you see some very impressive victories against Tennessee and against Houston, and a blowout shutout against Dallas. They won at home, coming back from behind against the Giants. They destroyed they've owned Tennessee this season, and I think that from what I hear, they've beaten Tennessee in like most of the past 20 meetings or something. It's not even a close rivalry at this point. And now they've beaten Houston again. So I think that the Colts are in for almost a Cinderella season. So yeah, I think that you could definitely see them winning on the road over there in Tennessee. So let me see here. So then that's the one that's locked up. So the winner of the other game, the Chargers and Baltimore, is going to go to New England. Of the 2 teams, I would say that, this is difficult to say, but the Chargers have a better chance of beating the Patriots because the Baltimore offense, I think, is more containable. Bill Belichick will have an easier time against the Baltimore offense than against the Chargers. And also, the Chargers' defense, I think, is still manageable. They could probably pull out a victory against New England. New England doesn't have the playmakers that it used to. Gronk is not the factor that he has. But now the playoffs is a little different. So It could be that what we've seen during the regular season between Brady and Gronk and all these other mainstays on the Patriots, it could be that kind of changes in the playoffs as it has in the past, because Brady simply, he turns on his postseason clutch performance genes or whatever. The genes activate. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But I would say that of the teams that could advance, it's the Chargers that are the more dangerous one. Now, going into the AFC Championship, so let's say it plays out the way that I said it would, and you have Baltimore going to New England. New England beats Baltimore. Indianapolis beats Kansas City. I see Indianapolis easily. Well, I shouldn't say easily, but I see them beating the Patriots. I do see that happening. If Kansas City advances, I don't think that they have as good of a chance, even though they're the number 1 seed. They would be hosting New England. Actually, if they were hosting New England, that could actually be the one advantage that Kansas City has over Indianapolis. If Indianapolis advances to play New England, then I think it's advantage New England, but I pick Indianapolis to win. If Kansas City advances and they host New England, I don't know what to call yet. I'd have to see both of these games in order to be able to make a call. And, I don't know if I'll get to see both of these games next week, but we'll see. Now, in the NFC, neither of the matchups is yet picked, because the higher seed in the Seattle-Dallas game won. So Seattle is the lowest seed. If they would have won, I think even if they would have won, you still have to wait till the outcome of the Philadelphia-Chicago game. So if Chicago wins, you're going to have Dallas versus New Orleans, and you're going to have Chicago versus the Rams. If Philadelphia wins, you're going to have Dallas versus LA and Philly versus New Orleans, in which case I definitely pick New Orleans to defeat Philadelphia. Not that I have anything that I would say. I would say that the victory earlier this year, where New Orleans just busted Philadelphia, I think they won 48-7. It indicates that even with Nick Foles, the Eagles would have lost pretty badly against New Orleans. If Chicago advances to play the Rams, okay, if Chicago advances, I would say that Chicago does beat LA. Okay, if Dallas advances to play LA, I would also say that the Cowboys have. I think that's the toughest matchup of that week. It would be Dallas versus LA. That would be the toughest matchup to pick. Okay, the other ones I think are the easiest. Kansas City versus Indiana. I think Indianapolis wins. And New England versus Baltimore. I think for sure New England wins. And then New Orleans versus Philadelphia. If that plays out, I think New Orleans is a huge favorite to win. The Dallas versus LA matchup would be the hardest. Dallas versus New Orleans, I pick New Orleans. Sorry to all the other Cowboy fans out there, but I think that the victory at home against New Orleans was a different type of environment from what you're going to see in the Superdome, although Dallas does have a good traveling fan base. So that's about it. Please like this channel. Subscribe to my main channel, Bold Like a Leopard, which I may attach in the video when it comes up. Also, subscribe to me on Gab, Minds, Cocoscope, and BitChute, and I'll talk to you guys later.